Let's look at an example. Here's a problem, the type of thing that you might be asked to write a piece of software to address. So we work for HR in a supermarket with 85 full-time and 120 part-time employees. So every week we need to calculate their weekly gross pay, that is before tax and national insurance, pension and so on, for every employee. So everyone has an hourly rate and a number of hours that they've worked that week. And if an employee works 40 or fewer hours a week, their pay is the number of hours times their hourly rate. However, if they work more than 40 hours, they're entitled to a 50% increase in their hourly rate as overtime for the hours over 40. So how do we calculate an employee's gross pay? The first thing to ask is this: what's the important information that we need and what can we leave out? What is the minimal set of information that we need to solve this problem? And the second thing to ask is there any inherent structure to the problem? Can we put people into one or two categories, for example? Have a think, pause the movie and then come back when you've jotted down some ideas. So what do we need to know? What's the only information that we need? For every person, we only need their hourly rate and the number of hours they've worked. These form the input information to our algorithm as they're fed into it. The only output that we're worried about is their gross pay, and that's the only thing that comes out of the algorithm. We're not interested in anything else. The fact that it's a supermarket is irrelevant. The fact that it has full or part-time employees, all of that is irrelevant information to the problem at hand, so we can safely get rid of it. We only keep the information that we specifically need to solve the problem. So the second question concerned patterns, like the pattern that we saw on the clock face. So here we notice a sort of branching structure. People are either one thing or another, depending on whether or not they worked more than 40 hours. Now these types of structures are generally signalled by words like if, and they tell us that there's a decision to be made, in this case which category somebody falls into. So given that we know what the two categories are, take a moment to write down in words how we would calculate the pay in each of these two categories. And it might be a little bit more complicated than you think. So pause the movie and come back when you've done that. So we have two scenarios, two categories, one in which the person has worked 40 or fewer hours and the other where they've worked more than 40 hours. So the first situation is quite straightforward. The pay is simply the hours times the rate. However, in the second category, we need to calculate two components to their pay. The standard pay, that is the 40 hours at the standard rate, but then they get the excess hours that are costed at time and a half. So we calculate the excess hours by subtracting 40 from their hours. So if they'd worked 50 hours, we'd get 10 hours, for example, and then multiply this by their hourly rate multiplied by 1 times 5 to give the overtime.